Have you ever heard of a disaster caused by beer? It sounds like a bad joke, but in 1814, London experienced a tragedy so bizarre it's almost hard to believe. This isn't just a quirky historical anecdote. It's a shocking story about the dark side of the Industrial Revolution and how the simple act of brewing beer turned deadly. Today, we're diving into the Great London Beer Flood. It all happened on October 17, 1814, in the bustling, crowded parish of St. Giles. This area was a maze of narrow streets and tightly packed tenement buildings, home to many of London's poorest families. Nestled right in the middle of this residential chaos was the Moe and Company Brewery, one of the largest in the city. They were famous for their porter, a dark, heavy beer that was wildly popular. To keep up with demand, they brewed it on an industrial scale, using massive wooden vats that towered over the surrounding buildings. These vats were truly colossal. The one that caused the disaster held over 135,000 imperial gallons of fermenting beer. To put that in perspective, that's enough to fill a modern swimming pool. It stood 22 feet high, held together by massive iron hoops. For years, these vats had been a symbol of industrial might and prosperity. But on that fateful October afternoon, one of them became a weapon. Inside the brewery, a clerk named George Crick was going about his daily duties. He noticed that one of the iron rings on the giant vat had slipped. This wasn't entirely unusual. These things happened. He reported it to his superior, who assured him it was no real danger and that it would be fixed later. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Just an hour later, at around 5:30 p.m., the vat ruptured with a deafening explosion that locals said sounded like thunder. The force of the blast was immense. The iron hoops snapped, and the vat's contents, a tsunami of hot fermenting porter, were unleashed. The initial wave was so powerful, it blew out the back wall of the brewery as if it were made of paper. From there, a torrent of dark, sticky liquid, estimated to be 15 feet high, surged into the streets. It wasn't a gentle spill. Was a violent, destructive flood. The wave crashed into the New Street Rookery, a slum area directly behind the brewery. The force was enough to demolish 2 houses instantly. It tore through the narrow alleyways, smashing into the flimsy walls of tenement buildings. The real horror of the disaster was concentrated in the basements. Many families lived in cramped, subterranean rooms, and when the beer wave hit, it filled these cellars in minutes. People were trapped with no way to escape. One of the most heart-wrenching stories is that of a wake being held for a young boy in a basement. The mother, Anne Saville, and 4 other mourners were gathered together when the beer flooded the room, sweeping them away. All of them perished. In another cellar, a mother and her young daughter were taking their afternoon tea when the walls collapsed and the beer poured in, drowning them both. The victims weren't just drowned. Some were crushed by the collapsing buildings or died from their injuries. The scene was one of utter chaos and devastation. The air was thick with the smell of beer and the cries of the injured and dying. In the immediate aftermath, there was a strange and grim mix of tragedy and absurdity. Survivors were covered in sticky, black porter. The streets were littered with the debris of shattered homes and floating beer barrels. There were even apocryphal tales, likely exaggerated over time, of people rushing to the scene not to help, but to scoop up the free beer in any container they could find, leading to even more chaos. While these stories might be more legend than fact, they paint a picture of the desperation and opportunism that existed in 19th century London. Emergency services, as we know them today, didn't exist. The rescue effort was a disorganized scramble by neighbors and brewery workers, pulling survivors from the rubble and the beer-soaked wreckage. In total, 8 people were confirmed to have died, all of them women and children. The victims included a 3-year-old girl, a teenage pub servant, and the mourners at the wake. The true number may have been higher, as the poorest residents of the rookeries were often uncounted and invisible to the authorities. So, what happened next? Who was held responsible for this deadly flood? The answer is shockingly, no one. An inquest was held a few days later. The jury, made up of local tradesmen, was taken to see the scene of the devastation. They heard testimony from the brewery workers and the survivors. In the end, they ruled the whole event an act of God. No one at Moe's Brewery was found liable. The disaster was treated as a freak accident, an unavoidable consequence of nature, rather than a failure of industrial safety. For the brewery, this ruling was a massive relief. They even petitioned Parliament for a refund on the excise tax they had already paid on the thousands of gallons of lost beer. A request that was granted. It saved them from bankruptcy. For the victims and their families, there was no compensation, no official apology, and no justice. They were left to mourn their dead and rebuild their shattered lives on their own. The community even had to resort to holding public viewings of the bodies to raise money for their funerals. The London beer flood is more than just a bizarre footnote in history. It serves as a powerful symbol of the new dangers that came with the Industrial Revolution. Before this era, a disaster on this scale caused by a commercial product was unthinkable. But as production ramped up, so did the risks. Giant vats, powerful steam engines, and sprawling factories created new and terrifying ways for things to go wrong. The beer flood showed how industrial infrastructure was being built right in the heart of residential communities, placing the poorest and most vulnerable people at the highest risk. The act of God verdict also highlights the prevailing attitudes of the time. The legal and social systems were slow to catch up with the pace of technological change. The idea of corporate negligence or a company's duty of care to the public was still in its infancy. The courts and the government tended to side with industry, viewing such accidents as the unfortunate but acceptable cost of progress. Over the years, the story has been sensationalized, but the core tragedy remains. It was a preventable disaster that exposed the deep social inequalities of the time. The Moe & Company Brewery eventually moved from the site in 1922. And today, the Dominion Theater stands where the brewery once brewed its famous porter. There's no grand monument, just a local pub called the Holborn Whippet that has a plaque remembering the event. The Great London Beer Flood of 1814 is a chilling reminder that progress often comes with a hidden cost, and that behind every weird historical event, there are real human stories of loss and suffering. It forces us to think about who bears the risks of our innovations and who is left to clean up the mess when things go horribly wrong. This video was brought to you by GX Works by David Taylor. If you found this story as fascinating and tragic as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.